Hello, this is Pastor Don Long.
And I'm Pastor Donna Long.
And here we are on a special edition of Grafted In. Donna, during these summer months, we're going to spend some time, instead of splitting our broadcast with part on Jewish roots and part on current events in Israel, we're going to spend the whole half hour talking about the nation of Israel and our connection with that nation. And this should be the 4th of July week that we're broadcasting now. So welcome if you're watching.
And happy 4th of July.
And we want to talk a little bit about the connection between our nation and Israel.
Yes.
You know, in our 4th of July parade, we have a float this year. It was Americans in support of Israel. But we had the President, George Washington, and we had several American kind of individuals historically on the float. And the question asked is, what does that have to do with the 4th of July? So I want to go back to the Revolutionary War to start with. Israel obviously wasn't a modern nation at that time, but there was a deep connection between this country, its founding, and the Jewish people.
That's right.
And George Washington was at a point where the Continental Army needed money. I mean, to fight a war, you needed money. And how could he raise that money? So he turned to a friend of the cause, a Jewish man by the name of Haim Solomon. So what do you know about him?
Haim Solomon, which people used to be taught that, but they don't anymore, but he was responsible for raising most of the finances for the Revolutionary War.
You know, I went through all of high school and grammar school. I never heard of him.
No.
And yet he was the financial backing for the Revolutionary War.
He was the key figure to the success of the Revolutionary Army.
You know, he was a broker, and I'm not quite sure what they did in trading back and forth. They didn't have a stock market in those days, but he made money on money. And so George Washington would go to him, and Haim Solomon was of such a character that if he had an investment, everybody wanted to be in on it.
That's right.
And
he had a good reputation.
He had a good reputation. And in fact, on one time, it was during one of the high holiday seasons for the Jewish people, and George Washington said, we need money and we need it now. And Haim Solomon even interrupted one of their services to say, I need to collect money from you. We need the money now.
That's a good friend.
And so hopefully you'll see on your screen a statue that is in Chicago of George Washington, Robert Morris, who is one of the leaders in the Continental Congress, and Haim Solomon. Right. And these men are who were responsible for the financial venture, and Haim Solomon was the money raiser. Now, he gave this money to the Continental Congress to support the army. By the way, he was never paid back.
That's right.
In fact, if his descendants today were able to get the money, it would be multi-hundreds of millions of dollars that we would owe him. So at the very foundation of our country, if it were not for the Jewish people, there would be no United States of America.
That's right.
But as we move into modern history, we find that the presidents of this nation have been very much in support of the nation of Israel ever since the Balfour Declaration said that Her Majesty's government looks in favor of creating in Palestine a national homeland for the Jew. And so the first president I want to share with you would be President Woodrow Wilson. Donna, why don't you read that quote from him?
It says, President Woodrow Wilson said, the Allied nations, with the fullest concurrence of our government and people, are agreed that in Palestine shall be laid the foundations of a Jewish commonwealth.
So we start with President Woodrow Wilson. Speaking for the United States, he says, with the concurrence, with the agreement of our government and the people of these United States, that we are all in agreement that there should be a Jewish commonwealth or a Jewish state in the land of Palestine. So he is the first American president in the modern era, in the 20th century, to go on record as saying we as a people agree that there should be a Jewish homeland in their historic land of Palestine.
That's right.
Well, then we have another quote from President Warren Harding.
Yes, and President Warren Harding said, it is impossible for one who has studied at all the services of the Hebrew people to avoid the faith that they will one day be restored to their historic national home and there enter on a new and yet greater phase of their contribution to the advance of humanity.
So President Harding obviously was a student of history. And as the President of these United States, he went on record as saying that the restoration of the Hebrew people to their rightful land in Palestine, the land called Israel. By the way, they were expelled from that land.
Yes, they were.
The Romans came in, conquered the territory, and kicked the Jews out and scattered them around the world. And President Harding said, you know, if you study history, that you've got to understand that the Hebrew people have a right to and will return to their land.
Historical national homeland.
That's right. And then he added that they would contribute to the advancement of humanity.
That's right, because they always have. And they always will.
And later in our broadcast, we'll be talking about that contribution.
That's right.
But amazing that President Harding was a student of history who believed that Israel was destined to fulfillment. Well, let's look at FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
He said, the American people, ever zealous in the cause of human freedom, have watched with sympathetic interest the efforts of the Jews to renew in Palestine the ties of their ancient homeland and to reestablish Jewish culture in the place where for centuries it flourished and whence it was carried to and the far corners of the world.
So in this case, now we're still before 1948 and the declaration of the State of Israel, but Franklin Roosevelt says that basically the American people who are a people zealous for freedom are watching what's going on in Palestine. They're watching the Jews resettle the land, again before 1948. They're watching what's happened in the British Mandate as Jews from all around the world are coming to that homeland. They're watching as these Jews are draining the swamps and building fields.
The land to flourish all around them.
And building cities. And President Roosevelt's attitude is that the American people, who are a people who love freedom, are very sympathetic to what's going on for the Jews to be restored to their homeland. Well, one quick quote from President Harry Truman.
Yes, and he said, I had faith in Israel before it was established. I have faith in it now.
President Harry Truman's a very interesting man because in 1948, when Israel declared itself to be a state, and by the way, the United Nations had already decreed that the land was there. It was theirs. The land had already been divided. We got to understand that. It had already been divided. The Palestinian Arabs already were given 3/4 of the mandate. For those who think, well, they have a right to a homeland. They have a homeland.
They have a homeland, that's
3/4 of the British mandate was given. It's now called Jordan, but it was given to be an Arab state. And now we still have Arabs who say, we want our own state. You have your own state. And that remaining 1/4, the United Nations said the Jews have a right to their historic homeland. And Ben-Gurion stood up on May 15th, 1948, and decreed that the birth of the modern state of Israel. Now, in our political system here, the State Department was against recognizing them. That's been an issue in this country for the past 60 years, that the State Department has been a pro-Arab, anti-Israel place.
That's right.
Now think about the State Department. First of all, the Secretary of State, and in fact the whole State Department, should be servicing the President of the United States.
Right.
And as appointed people, the State Department's an appointed body, that they should be subject to what the American people want.
That's right.
Harry Truman, as president, realized the American people were in favor of Israel. And he personally, in fact, the day that this came up, he opened his mother's Bible and he turned to the book of Ezekiel, chapters 36, 37, that talked about, can a people be born a nation in one day?
Right.
And he read in that Bible prophecy, and he realized as president of the United States, he was coming in line with that prophecy. And so President Truman wanted to recognize Israel right away, but the State Department under George Marshall was against it. And in fact, George Marshall threatened to resign. Now, in the world I grew up in, that's called insubordination.
Right.
I mean, you work for the president and you tell the president, if you make that decision, I'm going to resign and I'm going to run against you in re-election. I mean, all this terrible stuff. But it showed that even at that time, Donna, in our history, the State Department had developed a will of its own.
That's right.
Quite apart from the president or the people.
That's right.
And here we are 60 years later, and the State Department in our country is still driving its own agenda against our elected presidents and against the people.
That's right.
So Harry Truman, however, really didn't care.
Yeah, that's right.
And within a matter of minutes of Ben-Gurion's declaration, Harry Truman went on record, we, the United States, recognize Israel as a nation.
That's right.
Soon to be followed, by the way, by Russia.
That's right.
One of the few times that Russia and the United States lined
We're
up
in agreement. That's right.
real quick. But President Truman carried the banner of this nation and said, we are a nation in favor.
That's right.
Well, let's look at, I think here in Massachusetts, perhaps one of the most popular modern presidents would be President John F. Kennedy. Why don't you read what he said?
President John F. Kennedy said, Israel was not created in order to disappear. Israel will endure and flourish. It is the child of hope and home of the brave. It can neither be broken by adversity nor demoralized by success. It carries the shield of democracy and it honors the sword of freedom.
Wow, what an
That's
amazing
quite a
statement.
statement.
And you think back when John Kennedy said that, none of the modern issues of threatening to destroy Israel. One wonders if John Kennedy were president today.
That's right.
What would be his attitude toward the Arabs? What would be his attitude from these Arab nations that threatened to destroy Israel and cast her into the sea? President Kennedy was a prophetic president.
Yes, he was.
When it came to this statement. He said, Israel was not created
To disappear.
in order to disappear.
That's right.
In order to disappear. So that's the kind of statement, by the way, we Americans want to hear. We would love to hear our President Obama say the same thing.
Yes,
to stand up in the face of Ahmadinejad and all these people who make these kinds of we're going to destroy Israel statements. Israel was not created in order to disappear. It will endure, it will flourish. And then he went on to say it carries the shield of democracy and it honors the sword of freedom. Two key words that President Kennedy said why we as Americans support Israel is because it carries the shield of democracy and it honors the sword of freedom.
And the only nation in the Middle East that does.
The only
one.
And you know, Donna, it's somewhat hypocritical for our president to say that he supports the move for democracy in Egypt and other places without recognizing that the champion of democracy is Israel.
It's already been established right there.
That's right. And he should, if he's a champion of democracy, say without reservation, I support the only democracy.
And I applaud them for being in the midst of all these neighbors who are totally against them, yet they stand for freedom and they stand for liberty. liberty.
And that's why we need a John F. Kennedy
That's right.
style president
That's right.
to stand unrevocably
That's right.
with Israel today. Well,
Yes.
he was followed by President Lyndon Johnson, who
and
said,
President Lyndon Johnson said, America and Israel have a common love of human freedom, and they have a common faith in a democratic way of life.
so get the picture again. Here
there's
we are.
those two words again.
Here we are in the latter half of the 20th century.
That's right.
And our decision-making leaders, our presidents, are common in this understanding of why Israel and the United States are joined, as it were, at the hip.
That's right.
Lyndon Johnson says we have a common love of human freedom.
That's right.
And a common faith in a democratic way of life.
That's right.
Unfortunately, we have a president now who doesn't understand that.
He obviously doesn't.
He needs to
obviously
read the
doesn't.
history of his predecessors and find that without breaking rank, they were highly favorable of the relationship of the United States and Israel, and said so. And in this case, again, what it is a common love of human freedom. You see, in Israel, you don't need to fight for freedom.
No, you do not.
You can be a
People
Muslim.
don't rise up to try to have freedom in Israel,
In Israel,
like you're seeing in Egypt. and all
if you're
those
an
places.
Arab Muslim, you have a right to
You're free.
vote.
That's right. You have more freedom than if you're in one of the Arab states.
That's right. The Arabs in Israel are freer than
the
Arabs
Arabs in their own
anywhere
state.
in the
That's
Middle
right.
East.
That's right.
And so when the president applauds those in Tunisia and those in Libya and those in Egypt who are fighting for freedom,
That's right.
why doesn't he applaud the fact that there is an example in the Middle East?
That's right.
There is a nation
shining
state
example.
where all religious people have their freedom of
Freedom, that's
religion,
right.
they have the freedom of education, they have the freedom to vote. In fact, there are Arab
There's a
Muslims.
respect for human life there.
There are Arab Muslims in the Knesset.
Yep.
There is no freedom anywhere in the Middle East like there is in Israel,
right.
and America should support her without qualification. And in fact, that's what Lyndon Johnson did.
That's right.
Well, what about President Gerald Ford?
President Gerald Ford said, the United States has been proud of its association with the State of Israel. We shall continue to stand with Israel. We are committed to Israel's survival and security.
Notice that. President Ford says we are committed
That's right.
to Israel's survival and security. Now, let me tell you why. If Israel doesn't survive, America's
We're
next.
next. That's right.
The
We're next
Muslim
on the
world has
agenda.
been very clear about that.
That's right.
The radical terrorists say, first we're going to go after the Sabbath keepers and then the Sunday keepers.
That's right.
There's a supernatural hatred of the Jew and of the Christian.
That's right.
And one would be foolish to think that if Israel were toppled, that America wouldn't be next on
That's
the
right.
hit list. Europe is
right.
already there. And so Gerald Ford says we have a commitment to Israel's survival,
That's right.
but also to their security.
That's right.
To their security. So any American president like Obama who comes along and says, well, maybe Israel ought to move back to the 1967 borders, and we'll talk about that in the future.
That's an atrocity.
But it's an atrocity.
It's an atrocity.
It's ignorance, as Brother Hagin says, gone to seed.
atrocity
It is
against justice.
stupidity in capital letters, because you cannot have secure borders there. You're surrounded by an enemy who threatens to destroy you, and our president says, well, let's move back to these indefensible borders. A far cry from President Gerald Ford,
right.
who said, we are committed to Israel's survival and security.
And we could say, we know, we've been there, and we know how narrow that state is. And we could say, well, if President Obama were to go there, then he would see for himself that that's ridiculous to say that, to make that statement. But we're not convinced, are we, that even seeing that he would make that
That's right.
statement, that he would retract that statement and say, no, you know, having been there and seen, I have to say that I'm better informed now, and I retract that statement. I'm not convinced that he would.
No, he has a different agenda.
He has a different agenda.
Well, let's look at President Ronald Reagan and see what he said.
President Ronald Reagan said, since the rebirth of the State of Israel, there has been an ironclad bond between that democracy and this one. America has never flinched from its commitment to the State of Israel, a commitment which remains unshakable.
Notice that, unshakable. So we started with Woodrow Wilson, we went to Warren Harding, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan. President after president after president saying our relationship with Israel is important. It's vital. We're committed to it.
That's right.
And in one president's term, we've begun to dismantle that.
That's right.
The very relationship that has been honored by America through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 presidents. By the way, on through Bush. I haven't talked about Bush or Clinton. But historically, since 1948, presidents who have honored our commitment to the nation of Israel, and now we have a president who is uncertain. I think we have the wrong man in office. Let me tell you something else President Reagan said. Israel exists. It has a right to exist in peace behind secure and defensible borders, and it has a right to demand of its neighbors that they recognize those facts. Our friendship, Ronald Reagan said, is based on historic, moral, and strategic ties, as well as our shared dedication to democracy. Notice what he said. Our friendship, our unity with Israel, is based on historic ties, on a moral relationship, on strategic ties, as well as democracy. But notice that he said that Israel has a right to demand of its neighbors that they recognize her existence. Now, again, what would Ronald Reagan say today if he were president? I can imagine him being approached. We need to get the Palestinians to sit down with the Israelis. I can imagine him saying to the Palestinians, if you won't recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, no negotiation, no talk. And by the way, the United States is funding the Palestinians to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars.
Which we don't have, by the way.
Which we don't have, we're broke. But guess what? We're doing it anyway to train their police and et cetera, et cetera. We are funding people who are violating a basic rule that Ronald Reagan said.
That's right.
I think President Reagan would have been simple. He would have said, you don't recognize Israel? You don't get a penny from us. You don't get a dime from us. We're not going to support you unless you're willing to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. Ronald Reagan was very clear about it, that Israel has a right to demand that. And you know, we're sitting here in this week, Netanyahu has finally gotten bold. Finally. Maybe because when he went before the U.S. Senate, they applauded him and the House of Representatives together in that joint session.
That's right.
Over 30 times his speech was interrupted. Senators, representatives standing on their feet applauding him. See, he began to find out the will of the people of America is different than what this president has been saying. And the will of the people is to support Israel. And that's why the representatives stood up and applauded, because guess what? They got to come back and answer to us, the voters, in a way that maybe the president doesn't have to. And so Netanyahu has begun to say, all I'm asking Abbas is to say 6 words. I recognize Israel as a Jewish state. I recognize Israel as a Jewish state. That's all he has to say. Netanyahu says if Abbas will say that, we have a place to begin. But Abbas will not say that. Hamas will not say that. Iran will not say that.
And where do you draw the line? If they won't say that concerning Israel, do you think it stops there?
No, no, no.
If they're going to deny one nation's right to live, who's to say who they choose next?
That's right.
And they will choose next.
That's right.
Once, if they ever accomplish their agenda, then they're going to move on to the big Satan, which is us. Okay. So, and they would deny our right to exist.
So let's ask a simple fundamental question. If you and I are going to negotiate something, and you don't recognize that I have any rights, and you want all the rights, that's not called a negotiation. That's called a war. That's called the bully on the block. The bully on the block comes into the neighborhood.
That's certainly
and says,
not a peace partner.
Right. A bully on the block doesn't come and say, let's talk. He comes on the block and says, do it my way or I'm going to beat you up.
That's right. That's right.
And we have a bully in the Middle East.
Yes, we do.
And America
big
has
bully.
always been a champion for the people standing up against the bully until this current president.
That's correct.
And he won't stand up against them. You know, all of the past 3 years could have changed if Mr. Obama had simply said, it's simple, come to the table or we don't give you a dime.
That's right.
You say, well, that's manipulating. You better believe it is. Why would I give my money?
Manipulate or you will be manipulated.
Yeah, why do I give my money? And there's other issues as to why that may be his agenda, not for the point of our discussion. But what we wanted to demonstrate on this 4th of July week is this. America has historically
That's right.
been a champion of freedom and democracy. We have historically come to the aid and assigned allegiances with nations that were for freedom and democracy. And that we have a strong tie with the nation of Israel in her stand against terrorism, against those who would seek to destroy her. We have a long record validated by president after president that Israel and the United States are bound together. So on this week when we're celebrating freedom,
that's right.
You know, when we're celebrating the 4th of July and the fact that we declared ourselves to be a nation. Think about that. The Declaration of Independence. And we declared ourselves to be a nation. And then we fought for that nation, that we need to be able to stand with the only democracy in the Middle East.
That's right.
If we will not support democracy, then we have put seeds, Donna, into place for our own destruction.
That's right. That's right.
And interestingly, whatever Mr. Obama's ploy was to get the Arab world to love us, maybe they'll be nicer to us, it hasn't worked. They absolutely do not trust us. They do not trust Obama. And one of the things they discovered in the fiasco in Egypt is that all of the people said, well, you know, America may be our friend, like President Mubarak thought, but, you know, right climate, our president's going to turn against. And what Mr. Obama has put into the agenda of the world now is that no leader of any nation, even a free nation, can count on America.
That's right.
That's what's been established. No nation in this world, no government in this world right now feels comfortable that America will be loyal to her. So in the less than one term as a president, we have destroyed the understanding that America is a loyal partner.
That's right.
We are no longer viewed as a loyal partner. People don't know what's going on.
Nope.
And I, for one, you know, I mean, our forefathers fought to be free.
That's right.
And we have numerous wars that we participated in the cause of freedom.
That's right.
To establish that we are a nation of integrity.
Yes, we are.
We are a nation of freedom.
Yes.
We are a nation that honors her word.
That's right.
When we say we will help you in your time of trouble, we will help you.
Yes.
When we say you are our ally, you can count on us.
That's right.
We will be your ally. That is what the 4th of July is all about.
That's right.
Is
It's a great
standing together in the cause of freedom.
That's right.
There's no greater cause right now than to stand with Israel.
That's right.
And so over the next weeks for this broadcast, we're going to begin a series to describe the history of the modern state of Israel, because you're not getting it in the public school. You're not getting it in the college campuses around. To talk about what is the history behind the modern state of Israel, what were her rights, how was she founded, and you're going to find it very interesting. Call your friends, plan to join for each of these weeks as we share with you about history on Grafted In.